Okay, imagine, if you will, a history of of humanity that's
Mhm.
just so ancient. Talks about things like, well, sweat-born beings,
Uh-huh.
or suggest our own bodies right now hold clues, silent clues, to a time when we were completely sexless.
It's definitely out there.
That's exactly where we're headed today. We're going to explore this really extraordinary kind of esoteric view on human origins. And honestly, it's probably going to challenge, well, almost everything you thought you knew.
Absolutely. For this deep dive, yeah, we're looking at H.P. Blavatsky's huge work, The Secret Doctrine.
Right.
And specifically, we're digging into what she says about the evolution of the second root race, as she calls it.
Okay.
Now, our aim here isn't really to argue if it's scientifically true or not. It's more about trying to grasp the framework, the really deep structures she presents about our earliest lineage, these very strange ways of procreating, and the whole metaphysical side of development.
Understanding the perspective itself.
Exactly. Understanding the depth of this ancient alternative viewpoint.
And for you listening, this is going to be quite the trip. We'll bump into ideas like the yellow fathers and white mothers.
Evocative names.
Figure out how these early beings popped into existence through things like budding or being sweat-born.
Yeah, processes we don't usually associate with humans.
And maybe discover how some ancient myths might actually be hiding these incredibly detailed hints about our really deep past. So let's start digging into this unexpected family tree.
Sounds good.
So the Secret Doctrine starts talking about this second root race, and the descriptions are pretty puzzling. It calls them sons of yoga,
Okay.
and then, even more strangely, the children of the yellow father and the white mother. I mean, when you hear symbolic parents like that, what's this ancient text really getting at about how early humanity even began?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because those titles, they seem poetic, but they immediately point to this deep dual story.
Okay.
So the yellow father, it's not a person, it's symbolic. It stands for the sun,
Right, the sun.
which esoterically is seen as the ultimate fountain of spiritual life. It represents, the divine spark, Atma, the universal spirit and prana, the life force itself. It's the sort of pure, spiritual, positive energy.
Okay, the life-giving spark.
Exactly. Then you have the white mother. She's the moon. And she represents the direct physical and astral parentage.
Physical and astral. How does the moon fit in physically?
Well, this ties into a really core esoteric idea that our Earth is basically a reincarnation, karmically speaking, of an older planetary chain associated with the moon.
Whoa, okay.
So the beings who sort of seeded life here, the lunar pitris, they evolved on that moon chain. They provided the, let's say, denser, more formative building blocks for life on Earth.
The raw materials almost?
Kind of. So humanity in this view is the nursling of ether, or akasha. That's the subtle medium that sort of blends these powerful sun and moon influences to get early life going here.
Wow. So woven from sun, moon, and ether. That's quite the origin story.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets more specific about who these parents or progenitors were. The text says their fathers were the self-born.
Uh-huh.
The self-born, the chaya, from the brilliant bodies of the lords, the fathers, the sons of twilight. Who are these self-born lords and sons of twilight? Help us unpack that.
Right. If we look at the bigger cosmic picture she lays out, these are those lunar pitris we just mentioned.
Ah, okay, the moon ancestors.
Precisely. They're called self-born because their offspring, the first root race, wasn't created through, sex as we know it. Not at all.
How then?
They were essentially emanated, projected directly from the essence of these pitris through sheer will and thought power. It's a creative force called Kriya Shakti.
Like manifesting through thought.
Exactly. Pure thought form creation. And that word chaya is key too. It means shadow, or ethereal double, and astral form.
A shadow body.
Yeah, this chaya was projected out from the pitris' subtle bodies, and it acted like the first basic template, a really filmy astral outline around which denser forms could eventually gather for humanity. The original blueprint, you could say.
Okay, so the first humans were more like ghostly outlines. Which leads to the next big question. How did the second race reproduce? This is where it gets really strange. The text says it was by budding and expansion, the asexual form from the sexless shadow.
Right.
I mean, that sounds completely backwards compared to biology today. How could that possibly work?
It definitely throws a wrench in our usual biological thinking, but interestingly, the text itself points to things we do see in nature, just maybe not in humans.
Like what?
It mentions microbiology, how simple organisms can reproduce asexually through fission or budding, even touches on what used to be called spontaneous generation.
Okay.
So esoterically, the idea is this. The monad, that's the divine spark, the core evolving bit of us, Atma Buddhi, was initially wrapped in a very subtle astral form.
The chai thing again.
Related, yeah. This astral form, the core of the new being, was enclosed in what's called an egg-shaped sphere of aura, or the auric egg. Think of it like the container holding all the potential.
The auric egg. Okay.
When it was time to reproduce, this astral form inside would literally, but it would push out a miniature copy of itself from within that auric egg.
Oh.
This little germ would then grow, feeding off the parent's aura kind of energetically until it was ready to detach and start its own life. It's really described almost like how living cells divide and multiply, just on a much subtler, more energetic level.
That's an incredible image. Life just budding off. And then it seems like there was another step, the sweat-born. What was that about? Was it getting more physical?
Exactly. The sweat-born was the next stage in this asexual procreation journey. It represents a step towards more density.
How did that work?
It's described as a process where the vital essence, the life force, along with ethereal life cells, would literally ooze or exude from the pores of the parent's body.
Out through the skin.
Seems like it. And these exuded bits would then gather together, coalesce, and form a new being, one that was a bit more substantial, more condensed than the budded ones.
So still asexual, but denser.
Right. It was still a form of asexual reproduction, but it marked a definite move towards greater physical complexity. And this whole process was essentially laying the groundwork for the proper reproductive organs that developed much later, in the third root race. It's all depicted as a slow, gradual thickening, you could say.
A gradual process. Okay. And just when you think it can't get stranger, the sources point to something maybe still visible today, a kind of echo in our own bodies. They talk about primeval human hermaphrodites.
Yes.
And even mention that this whole question really puzzled someone like Darwin.
That's a fascinating connection, isn't it? The question becomes, if humanity had these radically different ways of being and reproducing way back then, would there be any leftover traces in us now?
Yeah, any fossil record in our DNA, maybe.
Well, the esoteric answer is quite bold. It suggests that the rudimentary, non-functional organs of the opposite sex that we all have are presented as direct physical proof of an earlier androgynous phase, specifically the early third root race before the sexes split.
So remnants of being both male and female at once.
That's the idea. And it doesn't stop there. The pineal gland.
The third eye.
Exactly. Often called the third eye. It's highlighted as another example, an atrophied physical organ of direct spiritual sight.
Atrophied, meaning it used to work better.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
It links back to humanity's earlier, more ethereal existence, when perceiving subtle realities, the noumenal world, was supposedly much more direct, more innate. It's like our modern biology is a living archive holding these silent stories of an incredibly ancient past.
Our bodies as living museums.
Wow.
It even connects some scientific ideas, like a botanist named Nodien and his concept of a primordial blastema.
Right, the basic life stuff. Yeah.
Connects that to this deanthrohanic essence, the gyre of the pitris. It's suggesting even science sometimes intuits these esoteric concepts.
Precisely. It's showing how an intuitive scientific idea like Nodin's blastema, this fundamental, undifferentiated biological substance, actually resonates with the esoteric concept of the pitris's ethereal, life-giving essence.
That
chaya, that astral pattern, was emanated from that essence. So it hints that maybe, just maybe, there's a shared insight there, a recognition of some underlying vital, formative principle, whether you approach it scientifically or esoterically.
Interesting. Okay, let's tackle another big mystery. If the first race was so ethereal, just shadows really, how did they make room for the second race? The text says they didn't die like we do, so what happened?
Yeah, this isn't about extinction or replacement in the usual sense. It's presented as a profound kind of transformation.
Transformation. How?
The first race, being these astral shadows, they didn't experience physical death. Instead, the sources talk about this continuous process: absorption, condensation, and then evolutionary transformation. The key phrase they use is, the outer of the first became the inner of the second.
The outer became the inner.
What it means is the ethereal substance, the basic pattern of that first race, it didn't just vanish, it actually served as the foundation, the inner astral matrix, the linga sarira, the subtle blueprint for the next slightly denser bodies of the second race.
So the old race became part of the new one.
Exactly. It merged into it, became its invisible inner structure. It guarantees this unbroken line of descent, this continuous evolution. The imagery is quite beautiful. The old wing became the shadow, and the shadow of the wing.
That is beautiful, almost poetic. And to explain this further, the text brings up that Greek myth Leda and her sons, Castor and Pollux. Castor's the mortal one, Pollux is immortal.
Right, the twins.
How does that old story connect to this huge evolutionary picture, and maybe even to us, to our own inner duality?
It's a perfect example of myth holding deep esoteric truths. It's not just a quaint story, it's seen as a powerful allegory about our dual nature as humans. Especially after the later event, the incarnation of the Sons of Mind, or Manasaputras, which happened midway through the third race.
Okay, so what do the twins represent?
Castor, the mortal one, stands for the personal, temporary part of us, the lower quaternary, as it's called. That's our physical body, the astral double, the life force, prana, and our desire principle, kama. This part is inherently mortal, tied to the physical.
The scuff that dies?
Essentially, yes. Pollux, the immortal twin, represents the divine spark within, the enduring individuality, the higher ego, or the self-conscious mind, manas.
The eternal part.
Right. Now, the part where Pollux shares his immortality with Castor, that symbolizes something crucial that happens after death, potentially.
What's that?
It represents how the higher ego, Pollux, can absorb the purified spiritual essence, they call it the aroma of its personality, Castor, if that personality was worthy during life.
The good stuff gets saved.
Kind of. The harvest of noble thoughts, aspirations, selfless acts, that spiritual essence gets assimilated by the immortal ego. And this grants a sort of conditional, reflected immortality to the best parts of the personality during the post-mortem state called devachan, a blissful rest period.
So even the temporary self can achieve a kind of echo of immortality.
If it aligns itself with the higher, the core insight is this constant interplay within each of us, the mortal striving to connect with, to merge with, the immortal spark.
That really resonates. The higher self potentially redeeming the lower. That's powerful for thinking about our own lives.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the deeper metaphysical rules driving all this. The text mentions triple lines of evolution, spiritual, psychic, and physical.
The three streams.
And it says about these early beings, the breaths had life, but had no understanding. Why was that lack of understanding so significant?
That's absolutely central. Those early forms were amanasa, mindless.
Meaning they lacked manas, the spark of self-conscious intellect. They had life force, they had a rudimentary awareness maybe, but they couldn't think, reflect, choose, or understand in the way we do.
So they were just alive, but not really thinking.
Pretty much. The text even refers to the emerald tablet of Hermes, the tabula smaragdina, to map out the cosmic ingredients involved.
How so?
It aligns the sun, the father, with the atmic ray pure spirit, and prana, the life force. The moon, the mother, provides the astral form linked to those lunar pitras. The wind, or ether akasha, acts as the vehicle or medium for mind, and earth, of course, provides the physical body.
Okay, so all the components were there, except mind.
The potential was there, but the actual awakener, the true instructor or guru that turns the instinctual being into a self-aware human, is described as the spiritual fire of Manas, the higher self. And that fire, that spark, was bestowed later by more advanced spiritual beings, the solar angels or Manasaputras. That's what truly ignited understanding.
Mind is the fire that makes us truly human in this view. Okay, so given that, what's the fundamental push and pull, the dual force driving this whole evolutionary journey, both back then and maybe even inside us right now?
That gets to the heart of the ongoing struggle, doesn't it? The great evolutionary drama playing out within every single person.
What are the forces?
Well, on one hand, you have the monad, that divine eternal core we talked about. It exerts this inherent, mostly unconscious pull upwards towards perfection, like a spiritual gravity drawing everything towards higher states.
Upward pull.
Right. But then you have the counterforce. That's the lower self, the personality, the astral body, driven by what's called tanha.
Tanha.
It's a Sanskrit word. It means thirst, specifically the thirst for manifested sensory existence. It's the clinging to life, the desires, the attachments that bind us to the cycle of rebirth and, well, ultimately lead to suffering.
The desires that keep us stuck.
Exactly. So it's this constant tug of war, the spiritual pull of the higher self versus the material pull and cravings of the lower ego. The text actually mentions a turning point in cosmic evolution,
When was that?
said to be midway through our current fourth round of evolution, during the fourth root race, which was Atlantis, according to Blavatsky. That's supposedly when the spiritual impulse started to really gain the upper hand over the purely material one on a planetary scale.
Interesting.
And this also explains why those early races, the first and second, are described as having no fire or water of their own.
Why is that?
Because they lacked the active self-conscious fire of menace, the intellect, and they lacked the developed water of complex desires and emotions tied to a self-aware personality. The core idea, the real you, the real man, isn't the physical shell. It's the pre-existing monad, the eternal soul journeying through all these forms.
The monad is the real traveler.
Yeah.
Okay, here's something else really striking. The sources say this whole idea of early humanity being asexual or androgynous isn't just some weird one-off claim from Blavatsky. It's presented more like a universal mystery, something hidden in symbols and myths all over the world.
Absolutely, and that's what gives it such resonance, potentially. It points to shared symbolism across cultures. Think about the Egyptian Sphinx, for instance.
Yeah.
Often interpreted as embodying this very duality, hinting at a combined earlier state before separation. Or look at the ancient book of Enoch. It describes Adam not just as the first man, but as the first divine androgyne.
Both male and female in one.
Initially, yes, before being separated. Even the Hebrew name for God, often rendered Jehovah, which is a compound name, Jehovah. Esoterically, it's interpreted to mean male life, Jah, and female life, Hova, first united, then divided.
That's incredible.
And it lays out this really specific sequence. First race, totally sexless, reproducing by that asexual budding. Second race, mostly asexual, reproducing via the sweat-born method. Early third race, fully androgynous, hermaphroditic. And then only later in the third race do the sexes finally separate into male and female as we know it today. It's a vast evolutionary timeline.
Mind-blowing. So this completely flips the script on how many people understand, say, the biblical story of the fall.
Totally. It reframes it entirely. From this esoteric angle, the fall isn't about sin in a moralistic sense. It's not about punishment.
What is it then?
It's seen as a natural, even necessary evolutionary descent. A descent into denser physical matter and into sexual generation. It was needed, the teaching suggests, for humanity to fully experience the material world and develop individual self-consciousness.
A necessary step down, in a way.
You could see it like that. And it draws parallels everywhere. Adam Kadmon in Kabbalah, Brahma and his creative consort Vak in Hinduism, Adam and Eve. They're seen as different cultural expressions of the same fundamental archetype.
Same story, different costumes.
Pretty much. Even the detail about Eve coming from Adam's rib gets a symbolic reading. Pure spiritual Virgo, representing the undifferentiated potential, separates. And in falling into generation, she becomes symbolically linked to Scorpio, an astrological sign associated with generation, passion, and entanglement in matter. It's a profound rereading of these ancient narratives, suggesting a shared wisdom often lost or misinterpreted over time.
Wow. This whole deep dive, it's just offered such a radically different way to think about where we came from. A lineage and a development that's way more complex, multi-layered, and definitely more mystical than the standard picture.
It certainly is.
And it really shows how looking into these sources, these deep dives, can uncover these surprising connections between different cultures, different traditions, if you're willing to kind of look beneath the surface.
Absolutely. And I think the real value in exploring something like the Secret Doctrine, it isn't about just swallowing new facts whole.
Right, it's not dogma.
Not at all. It's more about sparking critical thinking, getting you to question your own assumptions about reality, about origins, and just recognizing that there are multiple ways humanity has tried to make sense of where we came from and what our purpose might be.
Different maps for the same territory, perhaps?
Maybe. It definitely reinforces this idea of humanity being a work in progress, you know? Constantly evolving spiritually, psychically, physically. And the echoes of that incredibly deep past are still potentially vibrating within us, shaping who we are.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to ponder, doesn't it? What if those echoes, the echoes of being sweat-born or androgynous, and maybe that constant inner struggle between our higher self and our lower ego, what if they're still quietly shaping everything about the human experience right now, just waiting for us to finally tune in and figure them out?